She used to believe that love meant standing quietly beside someone and helping them shine. From the beginning of their marriage, she had done exactly that when he had nothing but a small rented office and a second-hand desk. She was the one who packed his lunch every morning and encouraged him when clients said no, when bills were late. She stayed calm and told him better days would come. She truly believed in him, sometimes more than he believed in himself. In those early years, they were a team. They would sit on the floor of their small apartment, planning his business. She would share ideas, suggest ways to improve customer service, and even help design simple flyers. He would listen carefully back then. He would nod and say, "You always think ahead." Those words used to make her smile for hours. But success has a strange way of changing people. As his business slowly grew, his schedule became busier. Meetings replaced dinners at home. Phone calls interrupted conversations. At first, she understood growth required sacrifice, she told herself. She managed the house alone, took care of their children, and made sure everything ran smoothly so he could focus on work. Years passed. The small office turned into a large company space. The old desk was replaced by a shining table in a private cabin. He started wearing expensive suits. People began praising him everywhere they went. Friends and relatives spoke about his hard work and vision. Somewhere along the way, he stopped mentioning her. She noticed it slowly. When people complimented him, he accepted all the credit without hesitation. If someone asked about her role, he would casually say, "She just takes care of the home." The word just would sting, but she never argued. She told herself it was not important. What mattered was that the family was secure. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a large family gathering held at a banquet hall to celebrate his latest achievement. He had won a business award, and many relatives were invited. The hall was decorated with bright lights and flowers. A banner with his name was placed near the stage. Everyone seemed proud. She had spent hours getting ready, not in a flashy way, but carefully. She chose a simple outfit, styled her hair neatly, and wore a soft smile. She wanted to look presentable because she knew the night meant a lot to him. When they entered the hall, people surrounded him immediately. Cameras flashed. Hands shook his. She walked slightly behind, carrying a small gift bag someone had handed them at the entrance. No one really noticed her, but she didn't mind. She was used to it. During dinner, several relatives gathered around their table. One of his cousins raised a glass and said loudly, "We are so proud of you. You built all of this from nothing. Truly self-made." He laughed proudly. "Yes, it was not easy," he replied. "Long nights, big risks. Not everyone can handle that kind of pressure." Someone else turned to her and asked kindly, "So how does it feel to be married to such a successful man?" She smiled politely before answering, but before she could speak, he interrupted. "She wouldn't survive one day in my world," he said jokingly. "Business is tough. She wouldn't even know where to start." A few people laughed. It wasn't loud laughter. It wasn't cruel, but it was enough. Her smile froze. She felt heat rise to her face. For a second, she thought maybe she misunderstood, but he continued. "She gets stressed just managing the house. Imagine her running a company," he added with a chuckle. More laughter. She looked down at her plate. The noise around her became distant. She could still hear forks touching plates and glasses clinking, but everything felt far away. Her hands felt cold even though the room was warm. It was meant to be a joke. That's what everyone would say. But jokes carry truth inside them. She excused herself quietly and went to the washroom. Standing in front of the mirror, she stared at her reflection. Her eyes looked different. Not angry, not crying, just deeply hurt. She remembered the nights she had stayed awake, helping him calculate expenses. She remembered selling her small gold bracelet years ago so he could pay rent for his office. She remembered comforting him after failed deals. "She wouldn't survive one day in my world." The words replayed in her mind. When she returned to the hall, she continued smiling. She served dessert to guests. She stood beside him for photos. No one could tell something had shifted inside her. On the drive home, he was excited. He kept talking about potential investors and new expansion plans. She listened quietly. At one point, he glanced at her and said, "You were so quiet tonight." "I was just tired," she replied softly. He didn't notice the difference in her tone. That night, after everyone slept, she sat alone in the living room. The house was silent. She thought about the early days of their marriage. Back then, he had respected her opinions. He had valued her thoughts. When had that changed? She wasn't upset because he had joked. She was hurt because he truly believed it. The next morning, life continued normally. Breakfast was prepared. Children were sent to school. He left for work. Nothing looked different from the outside, but inside her, something had cracked. Over the next few days, she replayed the moment again and again. She realized that this wasn't the first time he had dismissed her. It was just the first time he had done it publicly. She began noticing small patterns. When she suggested ideas about investments, he brushed them aside. When she talked about learning something new, he told her she didn't need to. When she expressed interest in starting a small project from home, he would say, "Why complicate your life?" At first, she thought he was protecting her from stress. Now she wondered if he simply didn't believe in her anymore. One afternoon, while organizing old drawers, she found a notebook she had kept years ago. It was filled with business ideas, simple plans, budget notes, creative thoughts she once had when they were building everything together. She sat on the floor and flipped through the pages slowly. Her handwriting looked hopeful, confident, alive. A small smile appeared on her face. She remembered how excited she used to feel when sharing these ideas with him. When he came home that evening, he seemed distracted. He barely looked at her while eating dinner. His phone kept buzzing with messages. His tone was sharper than usual. "Everything okay?" she asked gently. "Just work stress," he replied shortly. She nodded and didn't push further. That night, as she lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling. For years, her world had revolved around supporting him. She had never asked what she wanted for herself. Maybe she had forgotten. The humiliation at the banquet hall was painful, but deeper than that pain was a question that would not leave her mind. Who was she outside of being his wife? She wasn't angry. She wasn't planning revenge. She simply felt awake in a way she hadn't felt in years. She realized something important. Respect is not given automatically. It is built, protected, and sometimes rebuilt. The next morning, after sending the children to school, she opened her old notebook again. This time, she didn't just read it. She picked up a pen and added new notes. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know how life would change. But she knew one thing clearly. She would never again allow herself to feel that small. The laughter at the banquet hall still echoed in her ears, but now it sounded different. Instead of breaking her, it was pushing her. And without telling anyone, without announcing any big decision, she quietly began thinking about how to rebuild something she had almost lost, her own sense of worth. That night of humiliation did not end their marriage. It did not create a dramatic fight, but it planted a seed of awareness, a seed of change. And though no one else could see it yet, that seed was about to grow into something neither of them expected. The days after the banquet felt normal on the outside, but inside her, something had shifted in a quiet and serious way. She still woke up early. She still prepared breakfast. She still reminded the children about homework and packed their bags. She still smiled when he left for work. But now, there was a new layer of thought behind everything she did. She was thinking about herself, not in a selfish way, not in an angry way, just in a way she hadn't allowed before. The notebook she had found stayed on the corner of her dressing table. Every afternoon, when the house was calm, she would sit with it. At first, she only read old pages. Then she started writing new ones. She listed things she used to enjoy. She wrote down skills she had but never fully used. She even wrote her fears honestly. One of her biggest fears was simple. What if he was right? What if she really could not survive in his world? That thought hurt more than the public laughter. She realized she had slowly started believing his small comments over the years. "It's complicated. You won't understand. Let me handle it." Those words had built a quiet wall between them. She had accepted that wall without noticing. One afternoon, she decided to test herself in a small way. She searched online for short courses related to business management and digital skills. At first, she hesitated even clicking on the options. It felt strange, almost secretive, like she was doing something wrong. But she reminded herself that learning is never wrong. She found a simple, affordable online course that focused on small business operations and online services. It wasn't expensive, but she still paused before paying. She thought about discussing it with him. Then she remembered the banquet. She decided this time she would not ask for permission to grow. Using some personal savings she had quietly kept over the years, she enrolled. The first class felt overwhelming. There were new terms, new tools, and new concepts. For a moment, doubt returned. She almost closed her laptop. But then she remembered those early years when she used to sit beside him, discussing ideas confidently. That woman still existed somewhere inside her. So she continued. Every night after dinner, once everyone slept, she studied. At first, she struggled to manage time. She would feel tired, and her eyes would burn from staring at the screen. But there was also something exciting about learning again. It made her feel alive. Meanwhile, his world was not as smooth as it appeared. One evening, he came home unusually quiet. He loosened his tie and sat heavily on the couch. She noticed a tension in his face. "Long day?" she asked gently. He nodded but did not say much. Over the next few weeks, his mood became more unpredictable. Some days he was confident and energetic. Other days he seemed worried and distant. He started making more calls at night. Sometimes he would speak in a lower voice and step into another room. She did not interfere, but she sensed pressure building around him. Then one evening, while she was studying in the bedroom, she heard his voice raise in frustration during a phone call. She had never heard him sound that stressed before. After the end of the call, he stayed silent for a long time. At dinner, he finally spoke. "One of our investments didn't go as planned," he said carefully. "It's temporary. I'll handle it." She looked at him calmly. "Do you want to talk about it?" He hesitated for a brief second. It seemed like he might open up, but then he shook his head. "It's complicated." Those same words again. She didn't argue. She simply nodded. But inside, she felt something different this time. Instead of feeling excluded, she felt prepared. Her course was slowly building her understanding of business risks, financial planning, and client relations. The more she learned, the more she realized that business was not magic. It was planning, patience, and problem solving. It was something she was capable of learning. Weeks passed. His company's situation became harder. A large client delayed payment. A partner backed out of a deal. He started coming home later than usual. The house atmosphere changed. Even the children sensed tension. One afternoon, while reviewing her course material, she had an idea. The course mentioned small online services that required minimal investment but could grow steadily with consistency. She thought about her own skills, organization, communication, planning. She decided to try something small. She created a simple online profile offering a service she knew she could deliver well. It was nothing big, no huge investment, just a small step. For the first few days, nothing happened. She checked her phone quietly, hoping for a message. When none came, disappointment whispered in her mind. Maybe this was foolish. But she remembered something she used to tell him during his early business days. Growth takes time. She decided to give herself the same patience she once gave him. Then one morning, while preparing breakfast, her phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had inquired about her service. Her hands trembled slightly as she replied. She stayed professional, clear, and polite. The client agreed to try her service for a small fee. It wasn't a lot of money. In fact, it was very little. But when she completed the task and received payment, she stared at the amount for a long time. It was her earning, not from household savings, not from his business, from her effort. That night, she didn't tell him, not because she wanted to hide it forever, but because she wanted to build something solid before speaking. Over the next month, she continued balancing everything: housework, children, studies, and her small service. It wasn't easy. There were nights she felt exhausted. There were moments she questioned herself. Meanwhile, his stress grew heavier. One evening, he finally opened up a little more than usual. "The market is unstable," he admitted while staring at the table. "We might face some serious losses." She listened carefully. Instead of feeling scared, she felt calm. "You've handled tough times before," she said softly. He looked at her, surprised by her steady tone. For a second, he seemed smaller, less confident, more human. That moment touched her heart. She realized he was not a villain. He was just someone who had let success fill his head. Underneath that pride, he was still the same man who once sat on the floor planning dreams with her. Her small online service slowly gained more clients. Positive feedback started appearing on her profile. One satisfied client recommended her to another. Her income was still modest, but it was growing. One afternoon, she used part of her earnings to pay a utility bill without telling him. It felt empowering, not because she wanted to prove something, but because she was contributing again in a visible way. The real change, however, was happening inside her. She no longer felt small. The memory of the banquet still existed, but now it felt like a turning point instead of a wound. One evening, while reviewing finances at home, he noticed something. "The electricity bill is lower this month," he said, confused. She looked at him calmly. "I paid it earlier." He frowned slightly. "From where?" She hesitated for only a second. "I've been doing some online work." He looked up sharply. "Online work?" "Yes, a small service. I started recently." There was silence between them. He didn't laugh this time. He didn't joke. Instead, he looked thoughtful, almost uncertain. "You never told me," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure it would work," she replied honestly. He leaned back in his chair, processing the information. For the first time in years, he looked at her as if seeing something new. Not just a woman who managed the house, but someone who had taken initiative, someone who had acted without asking for approval. He didn't say much more that night, but his expression had changed, and she felt it. The silent struggle she had carried was slowly turning into quiet strength. Fate had not yet fully shifted. His business problems were still serious. Challenges were still ahead, but something important had already begun. She had stepped into her own world, and this time, she knew she could survive in any world, including his. After he found out about her online work, the house felt different. Not tense, not warm either, just different. He did not joke about it. He did not dismiss it, but he also did not praise it. He simply observed. Every now and then, he would glance at her laptop when she was working. Sometimes he looked curious. Other times, thoughtful. She did not change her routine. She continued waking up early, managing the house, and studying at night. But now she no longer worked in secret. If her phone buzzed with a client message during dinner, she would excuse herself politely and reply. She no longer hid the screen. A few days later, he asked casually, "How much are you actually earning from this?" His tone was neutral, but she could sense a hint of doubt. "It's still small," she answered honestly, "but it's growing." He nodded slowly. That was all. But that small conversation stayed in her mind, not because of what he said, but because he asked. For the first time in years, he seemed slightly interested in what she was doing. Meanwhile, his business situation was becoming more serious. Late payments had turned into lost contracts. A deal he had trusted completely fell apart at the last minute. The pressure began showing on his face. He slept less. He ate less. He spent long hours staring at financial reports. One evening, she found him sitting alone in the living room with papers scattered around him. His shoulders looked heavy, like he was carrying something invisible. She sat across from him quietly. "Is it bad?" she asked gently. He rubbed his forehead. "Worse than I expected." He didn't go into details, but she could see the fear behind his eyes. It was the same fear she had once seen in their early days when rent was due and money was short. But this time, the numbers were bigger. The risks were bigger. The fall would be harder. That night, after he went to bed, she stayed awake thinking. She opened her laptop and reviewed her own work progress. Her client list had grown steadily. She now had repeat customers. Her earnings were consistent, though still not large. But she had something he did not at that moment. stability and growth. The next week, she made a bold decision. She increased her service rate slightly. She was nervous doing it. What if clients left? What if they refused to pay more? To her surprise, most of them stayed. A few even complimented her professionalism. Her confidence grew stronger. One afternoon, she received a message from a bigger client asking if she could handle a larger project. It required more time and careful planning. She almost declined out of fear. Then she remembered the banquet hall. She wouldn't survive one day in my world. Instead of shrinking, she replied, "Yes, I can." The project demanded long hours. She worked during quiet afternoons and late nights. She created detailed plans, communicated clearly, and stayed organized. There were moments she felt overwhelmed, but she pushed through. When the payment arrived for that larger project, she stared at the amount in disbelief. It was more than she had expected. For the first time, she felt financially significant. That same week, his situation reached a breaking point. He came home earlier than usual, but not in a good way. His face was pale. His steps were slow. "I might have to close one branch," he said without looking at her. She paused. "That's serious?" He nodded. "Investors are pulling back. Cash flow is tight. I miscalculated some risks." There was no arrogance in his voice anymore, only exhaustion. She walked to the kitchen, made him tea, and sat beside him again. She did not remind him of past words. She did not say, "You should have listened." She simply listened. After a long silence, he asked quietly, "How do you manage your clients?" She looked at him carefully. "I communicate clearly. I don't promise more than I can deliver. And I build slowly." He gave a small, tired smile. "Sounds simple." "It is simple," she replied softly, "but not easy." That conversation stayed with him. Over the next few days, he started asking her small questions, not in a controlling way, in a learning way. How do you price your services? What do you do if a client delays payment? How do you handle negative feedback? Each time he asked, she answered honestly and calmly. Something subtle was changing between them. For years, she had looked up to him in business matters. Now, he was looking at her with curiosity, not superiority, not dismissal. Curiosity. One evening, while reviewing his financial reports at the dining table, he suddenly pushed the papers aside. "I was so focused on growing fast," he admitted. "I stopped paying attention to the basics." She listened quietly. "I thought bigger always meant better," he continued. "Maybe I forgot how we started." His words carried regret. She remembered those early days clearly. The teamwork, the discussions, the respect. "You didn't forget," she said gently. "You just moved too fast." He looked at her, surprised by her understanding. That night, for the first time in a long time, they talked like partners again, not just husband and wife discussing bills, but two adults sharing ideas. She suggested small adjustments based on what she learned, reducing unnecessary expenses, renegotiating certain contracts, focusing on loyal clients instead of chasing new risky deals. He listened, not pretending to listen, actually listening. Weeks passed. His company was still struggling, but he began making careful changes. He closed the weakest branch. He personally contacted long-term clients to rebuild trust. He simplified operations. At home, her online service continued expanding. She hired a part-time assistant remotely to manage smaller tasks. It felt strange giving instructions at first, but she learned quickly. One evening, while checking accounts together, he noticed something. "Your monthly earnings are steady," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied. He leaned back in his chair. "I didn't think it would grow like this." She held his gaze. "Neither did I." There was no bitterness in her tone, only truth. He exhaled slowly. "I was wrong about something." She didn't ask what. "I underestimated you," he admitted. The room fell silent. It wasn't a dramatic apology. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Her heart softened, not because she needed validation, but because he had finally seen her. "I underestimated myself too," she replied honestly. That moment felt bigger than any public praise. The next challenge came unexpectedly. A major investor officially withdrew support from his company. It was a heavy blow. For a few hours, he looked completely defeated. "I don't know if I can fix this," he said quietly. She walked to her desk, opened her laptop, and brought it to him. "Let me show you something," she said. She displayed her financial growth chart, client expansion plan, and future projections. It wasn't a giant company, but it was stable, structured, and growing. "We can combine strengths," she suggested gently. "You have experience in operations. I have a steady platform. Maybe we build something new. Together." He stared at the screen for a long time. In that moment, he wasn't seeing just numbers. He was seeing the woman he once embarrassed standing strong in front of him. Not angry, not proud, just capable. He nodded slowly. "Maybe fate is teaching me something," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "Maybe it's teaching both of us." Outside, life continued as usual. Neighbors had no idea what was happening inside their home. Relatives still believed he was the unshakable businessman. But inside those walls, a powerful shift was happening. The man who once laughed publicly was now learning humility privately. The woman who once stood silently was now speaking with quiet confidence. Their journey was far from over. The real test was still ahead. But one thing was certain. The balance had changed. And this time, it was built on respect. After that night, something unspoken passed between them. It was not dramatic. There were no tears or big promises. But the air inside the house felt lighter, like a window had finally been opened after years. They began sitting together at the dining table in the evenings, not just to eat, but to talk. Papers, notebooks, and her laptop would be spread out in front of them. The children would sometimes peek in curiously, surprised to see their parents discussing work like partners. At first, it felt unfamiliar. He was used to leading conversations. Now he had to pause and listen. She was used to staying quiet. Now she had to speak clearly and confidently. One evening, he brought out detailed reports of his company's losses. Instead of hiding the numbers, he showed her everything. His voice was calm but heavy. "I expanded too quickly," he admitted. "I trusted people without proper checks. I assumed success would continue automatically." She didn't judge him. She simply asked questions. Calm, practical questions. What are the fixed expenses? Which clients still trust you? What services bring steady income? Her tone was thoughtful, not emotional. He answered honestly. As they talked, he began realizing that she was not reacting with fear. She was analyzing. That realization surprised him. The next step was difficult. He decided to officially close one major branch of his company. It meant letting go of employees who had worked with him for years. It meant accepting that the version of success he once showed to the world was shrinking. The day he informed his staff, he returned home looking drained. "I never thought I would have to do that," he said quietly. She sat beside him. Sometimes stepping back is the only way to move forward. He looked at her and gave a small nod. In the past, he might have brushed off such advice. Now he held on to it. Meanwhile, her own platform was growing faster than she expected. The larger project she had completed brought her more visibility. New clients reached out weekly. Her assistant helped manage smaller tasks, allowing her to focus on bigger opportunities. But growth brought its own pressure. There were days she felt stretched thin. Managing home responsibilities while expanding her work required discipline. She sometimes stayed awake past midnight organizing schedules. Her body would feel tired, but her mind stayed alert. One night, he noticed her rubbing her eyes in exhaustion. "You should rest," he said gently. She smiled faintly. "I will. Just finishing this proposal." He hesitated before speaking again. "You don't have to carry everything alone." The words meant more than he realized. For years, she had carried emotional weight alone. Now, he was acknowledging it. A week later, something unexpected happened. A former business partner publicly criticized him during a networking event, blaming him for the company's recent struggles. The comments spread quickly among professional circles. When he returned home that night, anger and embarrassment were written all over his face. "They're acting like I failed completely," he said bitterly, "as if I did nothing right." She listened carefully. "People talk loudly when someone falls," she said softly. "They forget to climb." He sighed deeply. "I used to stand on stage proudly. Now I avoid gatherings. Her mind flashed back to that banquet hall, to laughter, to public humiliation. She could have reminded him. She could have said, "Now you understand." But she didn't. Instead, she said something simple. "You are not your worst moment." He looked at her in silence. Perhaps he remembered his own careless joke that night. Perhaps he finally understood the weight of public words. Days passed, and they focused on rebuilding carefully. He began applying the principles she used in her own service. Clear communication, realistic promises, steady growth. He even asked her to review a new proposal before sending it to a potential client. She read it carefully and made small suggestions. Nothing dramatic, just practical adjustments. When the client accepted the proposal, he looked genuinely impressed. "You have a sharp eye," he admitted. She smiled. "I've always had it." He didn't argue, as their collaboration deepened. So did their conversations. One evening, after the children were asleep, he spoke quietly. "I've been thinking about that night at the banquet," he said. Her hands paused on the table. "I shouldn't have said what I said," he continued. "It wasn't just a joke. It was disrespect." The apology was calm, honest, not forced. She took a slow breath. "It hurt," she admitted. He nodded. "I know that now." There was no dramatic scene, no tears, just two adults acknowledging truth. "I think success made me forget who stood beside me," he said quietly. She looked at him steadily. "And I think I forgot to stand for myself." That conversation closed a wound that had been open for months. Meanwhile, her business reached another milestone. She was offered a long-term contract by a larger client. The deal required careful planning and possibly expanding her small team. She hesitated before accepting. The responsibility was significant. When she shared the opportunity with him, he didn't dismiss it. "You should take it," he said firmly. "You're ready." The confidence in his voice felt different this time. It was not protective or controlling. It was supportive. She accepted the contract. The workload increased, but so did her confidence. She organized tasks efficiently and delegated smartly. She even began teaching her assistant new skills. At the same time, his company slowly stabilized. It wasn't as large as before, but it was healthier. Fewer branches, fewer risks, more careful decisions. One evening, while reviewing their combined financial progress, they realized something surprising. Together, their income had reached a steady level again. Not flashy, not extravagant, but stable. "We're rebuilding," he said softly. She nodded. "Together." He looked at her thoughtfully. "I used to think strength meant standing ahead. Now I think it means standing side by side." The word stayed with her. A few weeks later, they received an invitation to another family gathering. This one was smaller, less formal, but she felt a quiet tension when she read the message. He noticed. "You don't have to go if you don't want to," he said gently. She thought for a moment. "I'll go," she replied calmly. "Not for them. For us." At the gathering, conversations flowed as usual. Some relatives still spoke about his previous success. Others whispered about his recent struggles. But this time, something was different. When someone asked about work, he didn't present himself as the sole hero. Instead, he said clearly, "We've both been working hard." The simple use of "we" carried weight. Later that evening, one relative asked her directly about her online platform. Instead of shrinking, she explained it confidently. Her voice was steady, her posture strong. He stood beside her quietly, listening with pride. There was no laughter this time, only respect. As they drove home, she looked out the window at the city lights. Months ago, she felt small in front of those same people. Now she felt balanced. He reached over and gently held her hand. "I'm glad you didn't give up," he said. She looked at him. "I'm glad you learned." They both smiled softly. Fate had not magically solved all their problems. Challenges still existed. Work remained demanding. The future was not guaranteed. But something had shifted permanently. Humiliation had turned into awareness. Failure had turned into humility. Silence had turned into voice. And in that quiet car ride home, they both understood something powerful. True success was not about applause in a crowded hall. It was about respect in a quiet room. And this time, They had finally found it. Time did not fix everything overnight, but it softened the sharp edges between them. Months passed, and their routine slowly became something new. It was no longer a house where one person carried pride and the other carried silence. It became a home where both carried responsibility. His company never returned to its old size, and strangely, that no longer bothered him the way it once would have. He stopped chasing fast expansion. He focused on steady contracts, loyal clients, and realistic goals. The stress lines on his face slowly faded. Her online platform, on the other hand, continued to grow. What started as a small service at her kitchen table had now turned into a structured operation. She had 2 assistants working remotely. She had regular clients who trusted her work. She even created a small digital handbook to train new team members. But the biggest change was not financial. It was emotional. One evening, as they were reviewing monthly expenses together, he closed a notebook and leaned back in his chair. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I used to think I was the reason this family was secure." She looked at him quietly, waiting. "I thought I carried everything," he continued. "I didn't see how much you were holding up behind me." There was no bitterness in her eyes now, only understanding. "You were carrying a lot," she said gently, "just not alone." He nodded slowly. "I confused success with superiority." The honesty in his voice felt real. Their children began noticing the difference too. They saw their parents discussing ideas respectfully. They saw their mother working confidently and their father asking her opinion. Small moments like that shaped young minds more than long speeches ever could. One afternoon, their oldest child asked her, "Did you always work like this?" She smiled softly. "I always could. I just started later." That answer carried years of quiet truth. A year after the banquet incident, another opportunity came. His company was invited to participate in a regional business event. It wasn't as grand as the award ceremony from before, but it was still important. When he received the invitation, he hesitated. "You should go," she encouraged him. "Only if you come with me," he replied. This time, his request sounded different, not as decoration, not as support staff, as a partner. She agreed. On the evening of the event, she got ready calmly. There was no nervousness like before, no silent fear of being embarrassed. She chose a simple but elegant outfit and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked steady. When they entered the hall, people greeted him warmly. Some remembered his previous success. Some knew about his recent struggles. But his posture was different now. It was grounded. During a small discussion circle, someone asked about how he managed to stabilize his company after the setbacks. He paused before answering. "I learned that growth without balance can collapse," he said calmly. "And I learned that I don't have to figure everything out alone." Then he looked toward her. "My wife runs her own platform. Watching her build slowly and carefully changed how I approach my work." The room grew attentive. He continued, "I once believed she wouldn't understand my world. Turns out I didn't understand hers." A few people smiled. There was no awkward laughter this time, only quiet respect. She felt warmth rise to her face, but it wasn't embarrassment. It was recognition. After the event, as they walked to the car, he opened the door for her and said softly, "I meant every word." She believed him. Back at home, life continued moving forward. There were still stressful days, deadlines, client complaints, financial planning, but they faced those challenges side by side. Sometimes they disagreed. Sometimes discussions became tense, but they no longer dismissed each other. Even during arguments, there was respect. One night, while sitting on the balcony, she asked him something she had never asked before. "When you made that joke about me that night, what were you really thinking?" He exhaled slowly. "I think I was trying to impress people," he admitted. "I thought putting myself higher made me look stronger." "And now," she asked gently, "now I know strength doesn't need comparison," he replied. She let the silence settle between them. It felt peaceful. Her business reached another milestone a few months later. She was invited to speak in a small online seminar about building sustainable digital services. The invitation surprised her. She almost declined out of habit. He noticed her hesitation. "You're not going to say no, are you?" he asked. I've never spoken publicly, she said nervously. He smiled slightly. Neither had I once. She laughed softly. With preparation and practice, she delivered the session successfully. Her voice shook at first, but it grew stronger as she spoke. Participants asked questions. They appreciated her practical advice. After it ended, she sat quietly for a moment, letting it sink in. Years ago, she had stood in a hall feeling invisible. Now she had spoken confidently in front of professionals. The transformation was not loud. It was steady. Their relationship continued evolving in subtle ways. He started helping more at home without being asked. She began sharing long-term plans for her platform openly. They set joint financial goals instead of individual ones. One evening, while organizing old papers, she found that same notebook from years ago, the one filled with early ideas and dreams. She showed it to him. He flipped through the pages slowly. "You wrote all this back then?" "Yes," she replied. He looked up at her with a mix of admiration and regret. "I wish I had taken it more seriously." She smiled gently. "It led me here anyway." He closed the notebook carefully. "I'm proud of you." The words felt simple but powerful. Looking back, the humiliation at the banquet had felt like a breaking point. But now she saw it differently. It had been a wake-up call for both of them. For her, it awakened self-worth. For him, it awakened humility. Neither of them would erase that night if given the chance. It had hurt, but it had also pushed them toward growth they might never have reached otherwise. Years later, when people asked about their journey, they did not focus on the fall. They spoke about rebuilding, about partnership, about learning to listen. In quiet moments, she sometimes thought about the woman she used to be, standing behind him, smiling politely while shrinking inside. She no longer felt anger toward that version of herself. She felt compassion. That woman had done the best she could with what she believed at the time. And now, she had become someone stronger. One night, as they prepared to sleep, he turned to her and said softly, "Thank you for not giving up on us." She looked at him thoughtfully. "I didn't stay for you alone," she said honestly. "I stayed for myself too." He nodded, understanding, because that was the real lesson. Respect cannot survive where one person feels small. Love cannot grow where ego stands too tall. And success means nothing if it costs dignity. Their story did not end with dramatic revenge or grand victories. It ended with something quieter but more powerful: balance. He no longer stood in front while she stood behind. They stood side by side. And this time, neither of them needed laughter from a crowd to feel successful. They only needed respect from each other. And that changed everything.